All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight, presented by FanDuel here at the Volume, live on AMP. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I hope all of you guys are having a great week so far. Don't forget, if you're checking this out on YouTube or on our podcast feed, that AMP is the very first place you guys can get our post-game analysis. So today we're going to be breaking down the Warriors getting their butt kicked in Milwaukee, despite going 20 for 50 from three. That's got to be really upsetting. And then we're going to touch on a couple of games from last night. The Brooklyn Nets winning 8 out of 9 by going on the road into Washington and controlling that game. And then the Los Angeles Clippers kind of sent a message to the Boston Celtics. Paul George and Kawhi soundly outplaying Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So those are the three games we're going to get to tonight. Lakers Celtics, which is later tonight, and Kings Sixers. Those are two games that I have my eye on from tonight's slate. We're going to touch those during tomorrow's show. So this was pretty damn dominant for Milwaukee. Absolutely physically pulverized Golden State. They out-rebounded them 55-37. They outscored them in the paint 48-30. And they outscored them on the fast break 16-7. And again, if you would tell me going into this game that the Warriors are going to make 23s and that they're going to shoot 40% from the three-point line, you like your chances in a game like that. But they got so soundly dominated in all of these other areas of the game that they didn't really even have a chance. I never really felt like Milwaukee was threatened. Even when they went on that little run there late second quarter, you get back within 6, and you don't get back in transition 3 times in a row. Next thing you know, it's a 12-point lead going into halftime. But you know my rule. We're going to talk about the Bucks first. We will get to the Warriors and their their road struggles here in just a few minutes. So Giannis kind of had a tough shooting night, but I thought Giannis completely dominated this game, all with rim pressure in transition. He struggled in the half court because he was kind of trying stuff, taking a lot of jump shots in this game, but he was just missing them. But in transition, Golden State couldn't do anything with him. And it's funny because I always used to say that the two guys that I would construct in a lab to defend Giannis that are in this league are Draymond Green and LeBron James. That unique combination of quickness with otherworldly strength and the instincts, the defensive instincts required to beat Giannis to spots and make those types of reads and things along those lines. And so this particular matchup, because I actually really like Kevin Looney as a potential Giannis matchup in certain situations, but they just didn't bring the requisite effort tonight. When they walled him up in the half court, they did a pretty nice job. But when he got out in transition, they just didn't bring that same type of effort they did against Boston. Like against Boston, they had a chaotic effort, just forcing their way back in transition defense to contain Boston, and then they just didn't bring that tonight, which has been an issue. And again, that's kind of the Giannis thing too. Like Giannis just keeps coming at you in waves. I noticed this to a great extent in that Boston Celtics series last year. It's like, yeah, Grant Williams can stay in front of Giannis a couple times, and so can Al Horford, maybe for even a couple games. But eventually, the better athlete that is more well-conditioned, that has that advantage, is going to continue to break on that shore until he eventually overcomes them. And that's kind of the way it was tonight. They did a nice job in half court, but they couldn't get in front of him enough times in transition. And then when they did get in front of him in transition, he was beating you with the pass. It was just an onslaught that never stopped, and Golden State couldn't do anything with him. And it's funny because that's part of why I think he's so clearly the best player in the league. That type of physical onslaught is proven to succeed in the NBA playoffs because a lot of the shot making stuff, it doesn't go away entirely, but the percentages dip way down, and the bigger physical teams tend to control that setting in the NBA. And Giannis is the guy that you can count on to thrive in those environments in ways that a lot of teams can't. And I mean, Golden State, again, I thought a lot of effort-related issues tonight, but they also got physically manhandled in this game. They were very, very physical. Ball, we talk about drop coverage being a problem for Golden State when we were talking, and Milwaukee was running just as much of a drop coverage. Like we were joking about how Blake Griffin was too far back, and usually James and Al Horford are back, but they're not that far back. Like Brook Lopez in a lot of these drop coverages was sitting, 20 feet behind the screen. Giannis was doing a better job getting up, but Brook was pretty far back, and they were just so physical on the ball, and then also an off ball with all of Golden State's screening interchanges and their cutting and stuff like that. They really wore down Golden State. And that's kind of the Giannis effect too. He's the personification of that effect within one basketball player, just wearing you down on both ends of the floor until eventually you break. And then once again, Giannis's passing continues to be really impressive. He had a really nice no-look feed to Wesley Matthews in one of his transition sequences. When he passes out of the post or out of isolation or out of pick and roll this year, the Bucks have scored 121 points on 117 possessions, which is really, really good. It was just a statement type of game for him. I still think Steph has had a little bit better regular season this year. And you guys know my rule. I'm not going to switch any rankings when it comes to, how I really perceive these players in the grand scheme of things until we get to the offseason. But this kind of felt like a statement type of game from Giannis. Like, don't forget that he is the best player in the world. And then Bobby Portis was also really good tonight. Did a great job abusing the smaller Warriors perimeter players, which is going to be an issue when Andrew Wiggins is out of the lineup. I talked to my guy who's pretty well connected with the Warriors, and he said that they expect Andrew Wiggins back within the next week and that it's not anything serious. They're just kind of taking their time with him. But Bobby Portis, he still isn't shooting great from the perimeter. That's the big thing that they need to get going at the level he had in the previous seasons. But a really nice scoring job from him. And he's just in this last like half dozen games or so is starting to look more like the Bobby Portis from last year. The Warriors, though. The Warriors are 12-2 at home. And they are 2-12 on the road. Coming into tonight, because the data hasn't updated, when the Warriors are on the road compared to all the other teams in the league on the road, they are 29th in defense and 25th in rebounding. So what happened to them tonight? It's not necessarily a matchup thing. I mean, hell, we saw them hold up physically extremely well against Boston. And no, they don't have the singular player that Giannis is, but down the roster, they come at you physically in a similar manner. They're extremely physical on the defensive end of the floor, and they constantly, relentlessly drive the basketball to the rim, just with a ton of players as opposed to just the Giannis type of impact. So what has been happening to them tonight? What happened to them tonight is something that's been happening to them all season on the road. Why is that? Well, I think it's a couple of reasons. First, you have a younger roster. Young players typically don't have really good habits. So I talk about this a lot. Like, when you're a basketball player, every time you have success, you try to figure out what specifically caused you to have that success so you can replicate it. And then when you have a bad game, you try to pay attention to what specifically caused you to have a bad game so you can avoid doing that in the future. So by the time you become a veteran player, when you're playing basketball in your 30s, like, you just have a really good feel for how to have good games and how to avoid the bad games. But when you're a young player, those habits aren't really sharp yet. And then also, young players typically feed on emotion. Like, it's not even just a crowd thing, it's just a basketball thing. For instance, you got all you guys who've played basketball a lot. You see the guy that goes and dunks on someone and then loses his damn mind. Probably hasn't done that very many times in his life, and it's kind of a cool emotional moment for him, so he gets swept up in it. But like, when you've dunked on a lot of people playing basketball, it's kind of just another play, and you run back on defense. You expect that from yourself, right? And the same thing goes with feeding off of the crowd. I've ventured to guess. I joke about this with my wife sometimes. Like, can you imagine what it must feel like for LeBron to run out into an arena of 20,000 people? Like, he probably doesn't feel much at all anymore, compared to the way a young player would react when he hits a three out of the corner in front of 20,000 home fans. So what does that really translate to? That means young players are more willing to play hard and smart when they're at home than they are on the road. They're more likely to hang their head and kind of let go of the rope when things go poorly on the road. So I think that's part of it for Golden State. And then the second thing is the veterans. Like, Golden State starters got rolled again tonight. And look, they're the defending champs. They're not nearly as motivated as they were last year. That's just a fact. That same ferocious transition defense that they had against Boston on Saturday night, we saw the other end of that coin today. They were really slow getting back, which is something you just can't afford to do against Giannis. So what do we make of that as we kind of zoom out from it? It's textbook championship malaise. We've seen this before, but at the same time, we've seen what the ceiling is still. Like that Boston team was killing everybody, including on the road, going into that Golden State game. And then they just completely manhandled them. Golden State sent a clear message to Boston that they are still better than them. And so when we look at that, we know the ceiling is still there. And for whatever reason, they're just not getting to there frequently enough. Usually championship teams are deep. And this is kind of the problem with what Bob Myers did and what Joe Lacob did this summer when they let go of Gary Payton II and Otto Porter Jr. You had depth and you had young players. But you let your depth go for financial reasons and also to clear way in the rotation for your young players to play. And so now that margin for error for what allows you to win in the NBA on a daily basis is smaller than what it was last year. And so as a result, when the Warrior starters are bringing a little bit of, inconsistent effort, particularly on the road, it's not enough for them to float during the regular season. So what does it really translate to is a balancing act as it pertains to the standings. Because like when you're looking at it for playoff matchups, like I always think about, the Lakers in 2021. They kept telling themselves, who cares? Just get to the play-in. We've been hurt all year. When push comes to shove, we got LeBron James and Anthony Davis. We can beat anybody. And, they weren't wrong. They were up 2-1 on Phoenix. But then what happened? And Anthony Davis broke down. And obviously he had been dealing with a bunch of issues. But it's just a lot to ask for that route. Like, what does that route look like? Because if the Warriors continue to play like this, they will be around 500 this year. And it's not that they're a 500 basketball team in a vacuum. It's just the reality of how deep the Western Conference is this year, that like if you play the level of basketball Golden State's playing, you're going to lose half your games, And so if you end up around 500 in this deep Western Conference, you're going to be in the play-in game. So what does that look like for you? Now I've got to win a high-stakes game, potentially on the road, potentially 2 games, depending on where I end up in the standings, just to get out of the play-in. My reward for getting out of the play-in is I have to now beat the top seed without home court advantage, or the second seed. Okay? Let's say we get through that. So we've got through high-stakes play-in game, and we just beat a top seed. Our reward for that is now we have to play a middle seed in the Western Conference, also on the road. And that's in the Western Conference this year. That could be anybody. That could be the Clippers. That could be the Denver Nuggets. That could be the Phoenix Suns. That could be the New Orleans Pelicans. Like who the hell knows how this is all going to shake up? But it's probably going to be somebody tough again. And then if you happen to get through that, your reward is you get to play the other top seed also on the road. Oh, and guess who's coming out of the Eastern Conference? It's the Boston Celtics or the Milwaukee Bucks. It's just a lot to ask for a team that, as we've been saying, is not very deep and has some older veteran players, so, I think it's very important for Golden State to recapture some of that urgency and go on a run. And we know they're capable of it. If they play good basketball, they're good enough with how good their starting lineup is to rip off a dominant 20-game stretch where they go like 15-5. And if they do that with how wide open the Western Conference is, that might be enough to get you into a 1 through 4 seed. Now you have home court, for potentially 2 rounds. There's a lot of benefits that come with that, right? The problem is that they have to dramatically increase their effort to get to that point, which brings me back to the trade market. Like the other thing you can do is you can trade a couple of these young players. Wouldn't touch Jonathan Kuminga, but I think Wiseman and Moody, I would flip those 2 guys for a quality veteran role player in this league that brings you some of that depth, that increases your margin for error, so that you have a better chance of floating during a regular season where your starters are not really concerned with giving daily effort the way that they have been in the past, which is completely normal. They are defending champs and they're old. It's just a part of the human experience. But yeah, the dichotomy between the Warriors on the road and at home is pretty jarring at this point. All right, moving on to the Nets and the Wizards. So the Wizards actually had a 5-point lead in the second quarter of this game. And then we got kind of a vintage Kyrie Irving run. He hit a really tough 3 off of a dribble handoff on the right wing. And then he hit like this ridiculous, like 5 or 6 dribble combination pull up 2 at the left elbow. And then he had a driving layup, the one you guys probably already saw all over social media, where he went up with his right hand, switched to his left hand, and scooped it in on his way down. Vintage Kyrie, the kind of thing that you grow to expect from him over the years. But he also made some nice defensive plays too. He had back-to-back steals. He had an isolation against Kristaps Porzingis at the top of the key, where he did what you're supposed to do there, which is like, hey, if you play positional defense against Porzingis, he's just going to shoot over the top of you. And he attacked the basketball, just was really aggressive to try to attack his handle, and he forced a turnover. And then similar play on the next possession down where Kyle Kuzma came off of a dribble handoff. Kyrie switched onto him and was just aggressive at his shooting pocket and knocked the ball free. Kyrie's got quick hands. And he's got quick feet, and he's got good instincts. So when he's actually engaged on the defensive end, which he has been a lot over the course of the last couple of weeks, he's capable of making some impact defensive plays. So Kyrie went on a run, got the Nets back in the lead. KD came back in at the end of the second quarter, played well. Then he had like 10 and 2 in the third quarter. They went up by 17, and then it was a classic, stiff arm type of game where they kind of hovered around a 10-point lead. They ended up winning by 12. The Nets are good. We did this with the Lakers last week. Like, yeah, the Lakers started 2-10, but they're fourth in winning percentage since November 13th, and they have some quality wins, including that big road win in Milwaukee. So we need to recalibrate how we look at the Lakers. And obviously they're even further away than the Nets were, but we have to acknowledge the difference in the way they played there versus at the beginning of the season. And the Nets are in a similar spot. They started 2-6, but since November 4th, they're 15-6. That's the third best winning percentage in the league during that span. In fact, for the whole season now, even counting their bad start, the Nets now have the 8th best record in the league, and they're up to 11th in offense and 13th in defense. So if you guys remember, coming into the season, I had all these tiers for our power rankings. And at the top, I had the core 4 teams like Clippers, Celtics, Bucks, and Warriors, right? And then we had our if things go right contenders, then we had our puncher's chance contenders. And I had, in that 5 and 6 spot, I had 2 teams that have had pretty uneven starts to the season, but we've seen their ceiling. And that was the Sixers I had at 5, and I had the Brooklyn Nets at 6. So even after everything that happened last summer, even after everything that's happened with Kyrie Irving, even after everything that happened with Ben Simmons, I thought the Nets had the 6th best chance to win the title. And the reason why is they are pretty damn good on paper. That's why I didn't like what KD said in those interviews. I think it was about a month ago where he was talking about, the guys on the roster. Because, I understand he was frustrated with the guys that were available at that point, but help was on the way. And I didn't understand the hand grenade, the proverbial hand grenade that he threw just kind of on the supporting cast, understanding that help was on the way. And the reality is they do have a lot of talent. When you really take a step back and you look at it, like, Kyrie's a pretty damn legit number 2. He's won a championship as a number 2 in the past, albeit alongside the second greatest player of all time. But they have a ton of shooting, like with Joe Harris and Seth Curry. You don't want Nabi's turned into like a really interesting 3-and-D player for them. And Markieff Morris is shooting really well. Even Royce O'Neal is shooting over 40% from 3 this year. Then they have like a bunch of long athletic defensive players with Kevin Durant, Nick Claxton, and Ben Simmons. And even Yuta Watanabe has shown a lot of flashes of defense. He had a really nice play in isolation against Will Barton in that game where Will Barton really got down into his chest and he just held his ground, didn't foul, waited for Will Barton to go up, and then he extended with his left arm and blocked the shot. They're clearly not as talented as Boston or Milwaukee. That goes without saying. I mean, they've won 8 out of 9. Guess who their loss was? It was the loss against the Boston Celtics, where it looked pretty much just like it did in the first round last year. KD couldn't really struggled handling the basketball. The guys hit a bunch of pull-up jump shots, but they never were really competitively in that game. So yeah, they're not Milwaukee or Boston, but they are very talented. And this is not a roster issue like it is for the Lakers, where you're asking LeBron James and Anthony Davis to be superheroes every night for them to have a chance to win. But, in that tier that's right below those top 4 teams, the Nets are very much in that mix. And so, they need a lot to break their way in order to win the title, but that's the same for a lot of teams around this league. And you can never completely write them off with Kevin Durant. And we've seen this too many times in NBA history where things do break right for teams, kind of like Milwaukee in 2021. It might be a Phoenix Suns that gets out of the Western Conference a flawed team because of injuries and matchups and a random upset here. And next thing you know, you have a chance to win the title with a relatively easy schedule like the Milwaukee Bucks did in 2021. That's kind of the way it can break, which is why you keep your foot on the gas and you stay in the race even when you're not necessarily as good as some of the best teams in the league. All right, let's move on to the Clippers and the Celtics. So Clippers completely dominated this game. They won 113-93. They led by double digits for more than half the game. Kawhi and Paul George soundly outplayed Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. They combined for 51 points on 18 for 34 shooting with 9 assists and 4 turnovers. Tatum and Brown combined for 41 on 16 for 35 with 6 assists and 5 turnovers. Jayson Tatum was below 50% in the paint again. He was 5 for 11. Remember, rim finishing was one of his big weaknesses last year. And then he had kind of seemed to remedy that. There was talk about this fancy rim contact drill that he was doing a lot over the summer, which I've been trying to track down because I want to hear about it. But like there was some drill that he's been doing. He'd been working on it. He'd been playing really well in the restricted area and in the paint coming into this season. Coming into that Golden State game, he was 60% in the paint and 73% in the restricted area. In the Golden State game and the Clippers game, he's 39% in the paint and 44% in the restricted area. And the big part that stands out to me on tape is shot selection. He just continually is forcing tough layups over rim congestion. There was a play where he challenged Zubac at the rim last night where it's like he was downhill. He had already beat multiple defenders. He was in a congested paint, and he tried like a damn near impossible left-handed finish over Zubac instead of just driving and kicking the basketball. It's so important for him to understand that they want him to be a play finisher, but it might be the play finisher after 2 or 3 actions and not necessarily in that first action. And this is that ugly side of Boston that we keep talking about. It's you drive and get into Zubac and you kick to the corner and then you relocate, and then that guy drives and kicks to you. Now you attack that closeout, and Zubac got out to the perimeter because he was containing, and now you've got a layup. There's always that opportunity to eventually be aggressive once the defense is in rotation and they make a mistake. But when Boston drives into the teeth of the defense and tries to shoot over the top of their rim protection, that's where they have problems. And I've been talking about that for years, and Joe Mazzulla has been calling it rim reads, which is another interesting way to refer to it. But that's the idea. When you get into the rim, do you have a chance for a high percentage shot in the restricted area? Cool. If not, keep it moving, because at the end of the day, you're just going to get better shots when you get the defense moving more frequently. Kawhi Leonard looked great in this game. He's slowly but surely starting to look like his legs are getting stronger and that he's getting his rhythm back. He got to the rim a bunch in this game, a bunch of driving layups. Even against, there was a lot of him attacking Marcus Smart and Malcolm Brogdon in this game, which is what you expect. And that's what you got to do if you're the Celtics, or if you're going against the Celtics. If you're going against the Celtics and you are a team that's got big scoring wings, you need to try your hardest to target Marcus Smart and Malcolm Brogdon. They're going to be more difficult. They're going to target your handle. They're going to ball pressure you more, but you have a puncher's chance in the sense that you can get clean looks over the top of them because of your size advantage. But there were even some plays where he was just looking eye to eye with Jaylen Brown and just dropping his shoulder, hitting the gap, and getting all the way to the rim. And I wanted to take this as an opportunity to talk about the importance of strength when it comes to ball handling. Because the dirty little secret is that the NBA is super physical. Don't let the old guys fool you. Don't listen to the stuff about hand checking. The dirt, like literally in the 1980s, teams were scoring 1 million points. Okay, it's completely factually inaccurate. They were scoring 1 million points despite never shooting threes. Okay, so the NBA is every bit as physical now as it ever has been, with exception of a little phase there in the late 90s where it became kind of ridiculous, and then they had to loosen it up a little bit. But the NBA is physical. It's not about necessarily your ability to dribble the basketball. There are a lot of guys that can dribble through cones at an extremely high level. It's about dribbling when you're getting hit and guys are swiping at the ball and they're hitting your arm. Like, you can practice that crossover dribble 100 times, but that depends on the muscle memory of the ball ending up in the same spot every single time. And if I'm getting into you and I'm disrupting you with physicality, I don't care how good your hand-eye coordination is or how sharp you are with your ball handling. You better be able to protect the ball with your body. And, say what you want about Kawhi Leonard. At his peak, he was a better athlete, and hopefully he gets back there. But he's probably the strongest wing in the league, not named LeBron. When you hit him, it doesn't have the same effect that it does on other players. And it's so funny because you see him. There was the drive against Jaylen Brown, the one that I'm referring to. He's on the right wing, and he kind of just does like a crossover dribble and then hits the gap. There's not a gap there. There's not a lot of space. And Jaylen Brown's kind of riding with him. But like I said, you have a tiny opening and you force your way through it with physicality. And if you're the bigger, stronger player, you're going to get all the way to the rim. And on this particular play, he just blew up Jaylen's right shoulder, went right through him and went all the way to the rim and finished with his left hand. But that's how he gets to his spots. And that's what helps him get the lift that he needs to rise up and knock the shots down. That's what helps him protect the basketball. And that's how he was killing Boston. He also hit a couple of tough threes. Remember, I was a big thing I always look at with Kawhi Leonard. When he's really in a rhythm, he can hit his pull-up three-point shot. And he had a transition three where he dribbled up the floor and just elevated and rose up and knocked it down. And then there was a late one in the fourth quarter where Grant Williams closed out on him, and he kind of just baited him into closing out and sitting down in his stance, and then just elevated and rose up and knocked it down. Still just 13 for 36 on pull-up jumpers for this year, so he's got a ways to go to get to like his peak, but he is getting into a nice groove. And then he's passing the ball really, really well this year. He had 6 assists last night, 6 assists in the previous game. That used to be his biggest weakness, and he's really improved. When Kawhi Leonard has passed out of pick and rolls this year, the Clippers have scored 1.48 points per possession, which is in the 98th percentile. When he has passed at ISO this year, the Clippers have scored 1.39 points per possession, which is in the 94th percentile. So Kawhi's biggest weakness, floor vision, he's turned it into a strength at this phase in his career, which is very important as it pertains to his physical decline. It's the same thing I've said about LeBron. Like, one of the biggest reasons that LeBron's been able to stay relevant at this phase in his career is he's such a good passer, and he's turned himself into a viable pull-up jump shooter that, he's still had a great deal of impact in the tail end of his career. Like, as you've phased out physically, you've got to replace that physical decline with skill, and that's what Kawhi's done with his passing ability. For the Clippers, as we're looking at them as, one of those top 4 teams, everything comes down to Kawhi Leonard and Paul George being great. Not good, but great. Kind of similar to what we were talking about with LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Like, the Clippers are, even after last night, 28th in offense this year. But if you look at it, like, they're scoring 109 points per 100 possessions. Boston is best in the league at 118 points per 100 possessions. There's not huge chasms between these teams, but that the difference is shot making and what stars do to squeeze those little extra bits of offense out over the course of a game where you might have 100 possessions. Whether it's Paul George hitting a tough contested 3 late clock, Kawhi Leonard hitting a post-up fadeaway, or them warping the defense to create higher quality spot-up opportunities, that's the difference between 108 points per 100 or 109 points per 100 possessions in 118. Yet they need Kawhi Leonard and Paul George to be great. It's the exact same thing that was happening with the Lakers. They were the worst offense in the league to start the year. But LeBron and AD weren't playing well. Neither of them was hitting any shots over the top of the defense. LeBron wasn't doing nearly a good enough job getting downhill, and Anthony Davis wasn't dominating the paint that he has been, the way that he has been. But since November 13th, that's when AD started his run. The Lakers are 5th in offense. And LeBron has also been much, much better. So the worst offense in the league turned into a top 5 offense over the course of a month of basketball because their 2 stars finally started playing like the superstars that they are. There's not, when I'm looking at the difference between the bad offenses in the league and the good offenses in the league, most of it comes down to superstar production. There is role player stuff. Obviously spot up shooting is important, but having superstars that are producing at a high level offensively it just goes a long way. Again, it's the shot making, it's rescuing possessions, it's attacking mismatches, and then most importantly, it's advantage creation. When we look at the Clippers roster, there's a lot of really intriguing players there. Marcus Morris is a good basketball player. Luke Kennard, good basketball player. Zubac, really good player. Reggie Jackson, Nick Batum and his lightning quick release. Like, they have a lot of really good offensive players, and they're 28th in offense. And a big part of that is, like, when you ask that caliber of player to stare eye to eye with a defensive player in a set defense in a half-court environment, they're going to struggle because NBA athletes are too good at defense. But if Kawhi Leonard is getting downhill and passing the way that he has been, if Paul George is getting downhill and passing the way that he has been, or hell, when Paul George is shooting the way he is coming off of screens and he's drawing multiple defenders on wide pin downs and stuff like that, that creates all of a sudden wide open opportunities for the likes of Luke Kennard and Nick Batum and Marcus Morris, which they can convert at a much higher level because they're more skilled than most of the role players in the league. So everything comes down to Kawhi and Paul George and their ability to play like superstars. That's what gives them such an exciting ceiling, which is why I had them as one of the top 4 teams in the league. They can look Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, the best duo in the league, in the face, and they can outplay them. And that just changes the math of all of this. Obviously, they have a long way to go to prove that they can do it. But I thought that that was a really big step for them and a big statement game. All right, guys, that is all I have for tonight. Like I said, we're going to be covering Kings, Sixers, and Lakers, Celtics tomorrow. As always, I sincerely appreciate your support, and I will see you guys next time.